Hello and welcome back to episode 24 of Living Richly with Curo. We are so happy to have you back for another week of exciting, fun catch-ups and all things financial topics. My name is Anne McCabe. I am the CEO and a partner here at Curo Private Wealth, along with my lovely, amazing partner, Atrisa.
Hello, I am Atrisa Roberts, COO and partner at Curo Private Wealth. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Love to have you all here with us every week. We have a great time recording this, so we hope you have equally as fun of a time listening to us talk about these things. So, this week's episode is what we're calling Executive Compensation 101. There is so much out there about executive compensation. And if you find yourself in a position where, for example, you just got promoted and now all of a sudden you're dealing with equity compensation and you've never had to deal with that before, we thought we would do a little 101 on all the different ways that executives can be compensated. So that is the topic du jour. But before we get into that, as we always love to do, we do a nice little A-team catch up. So you just got back, Atrisa, from your last vacation of this summer, because now it's like not summer anymore. So this
Right.
is really right at the end. Yeah, how was it?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I went on a cruise. It was my first cruise, which
Hmm.
people were surprised because I travel a lot and people are like, you travel a ton. How have you never been on a cruise? And I realized that it's just never something that felt appealing to me, which is why I never
Mm,
booked it. But I was invited on this one for a friend of a friend's birthday. And the time away was very nice. We ended up with great weather, even though I was essentially cruising in the middle of like a hurricane.
yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, the timing was wild. But I did confirm that I don't think I am a cruise girl. I think people who are cruisers love cruises and love that experience. I realized that while I had a great time, we went to the Bahamas. While I had a great time, I realized like, yeah, cruises are probably not for me.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it was still a good time. It was nice to get away and decompress and get some sunshine. I hadn't been on the beach all summer really, which was
Oh,
shocking
wow.
to
Okay.
me.
Yeah.
So it was the first time just getting lots of sun, being at the beach, being poolside. So that part was fantastic. But I much rather just, fly directly to Nassau and spend 3 nights at a resort and
Yeah.
come back than deal with the what I call the cruise chaos, but
Yeah.
it was a good time.
The peanut gallery, which is
Oh, yeah, and there's just people
the cruisers.
everywhere, and I'm a germaphobe,
Yeah.
so that was hard for me, just being crammed tight on elevators with people and buffets and everybody just kind of breathing all over all of the
Hmm.
food. I'm not a cruiser.
Yeah. Yeah, I was joking with you yesterday because it's fun to like oysters, right? Like some people are like, "Oh, I
Right.
don't like oysters," and I'm like, "Have you ever tried an oyster?" No, but I don't like them. And that was how you were with cruises. But now
Yeah,
you've confirmed that you're officially not a cruiser. So
yeah. Now, I
now
mean,
we
I think
know.
there's a way that if I were ever asked to do a cruise again, I see a way where it could have been better. Or like what I would make sure I would check for. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously it wasn't my trip necessarily, so I didn't pick this cruise or so I could see how the experience could be better with certain things, but I just think in general, I don't need to do a lot more cruises. Unless of course like somebody invites me on a Ritz-Carlton cruise or something, then maybe I would change.
All right, you heard it here, audience. Patricia will be your plus one on air, only on a Ritz
Absolutely.
Carlton
On
cruise.
a Ritz-Carlton cruise. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's good.
Anyway.
I'm glad you got away. I'm glad
Yeah.
your batteries were recharged and, made some new friends, which is nice. So,
Yeah.
and now again, you can like check the box, had the experience, don't need to do it again kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Good,
All
good.
right. What's going on with you?
So I was in Nashville last week, as you know,
Mhm.
very different from the Bahamas. I was at an advisor, I'm going to call it a summit. That's actually what it was called, a summit. It wasn't a full-blown conference. So there were about 38 advisors who qualified for this summit. And I actually had the pleasure of speaking in the afternoon one day, which was really fun. So met some awesome people. There was a really nice combination of older advisors who had been
Mhm.
in the business for the most part, but also some young new talent, which was really exciting, to just, talk with them and kind of remember back to how incredibly hard the first few years of this
Yeah.
business were, commiserating with, about the eating ramen noodles and whatnot. But it was really fun. And I wanted to share something. So part of the homework before the summit was reading this book called
Mhm.
Setting the Table by Danny
Okay.
Meyer. So, in addition to lots of other restaurants, he is the founder of Shake Shack. So, most people
Oh.
will know, right? Most people know Shake Shack. There's a bunch of other restaurants that he started in New York City. So, he's from New York. But one of the things I wanted to share, which I loved, because in at Curo, Teresa and I are, and our whole team are constantly focused on client service and the client experience. And this whole
Mhm.
book is from the standpoint of somebody who's in the restaurant business, but taking the concepts that he's learned about delivering great service and applying them to lots of different businesses. So that's sort of the premise of the book. But one
Okay.
of the things that I read that I wanted to share, because I think this is so great, is he was talking about the difference between service and hospitality. And he said, service is the technical delivery of a
Mm.
product. Hospitality is how the delivery of that product makes the recipient feel. And that service is a monologue versus hospitality is a dialogue. And I
Hmm.
thought, isn't that amazing? I thought that was so great because we always use the word service, right? We have a client
Yeah,
service
absolutely.
model. And we talk about client service and we talk about client experience as well. But I love the idea of kind of flipping that from service to hospitality and the idea that it's about how our service and the delivery of our service makes people feel. So I thought that was really cool.
Mm.
So highly recommend the book.
Yeah, I love that concept.
So it was a lot of fun. Got to see some live country music, which I love. So that was
Oh, I
really
know that
fun
was
as
your right up
well.
your alley.
Right up my alley. Yeah, got to go to Tootsie's, an old classic on
Yeah.
Broadway in Nashville, so it was a lot of fun. Had a great time.
Wonderful. I'm glad it was a great experience for you. I am very proud of you, and I know you represented Curo Private Wealth extremely well. So, of
Thank you. I
course,
try always try to
of course.
represent for us. So that takes us to our topic of the day. So let's talk about executive compensation. And this is something we hear brought up so much in the news. And I think specifically around like executives, corporate executives pay, right? And you'll
Hmm.
read things like, oh, this person made $35 million last year, and I think something that's important to mention is that these corporate executives, the majority of their compensation package is not straight salary, right? So when you read that, the 35 million or the 50 million or whatever, it's not like these people are making that amount in salary. Most of their compensation actually comes in the form of non-salary, right? Whether that be
Right.
bonus or whether that be equity compensation. So we're going to dig in a little bit more to equity compensation. But the other thing to remember is that you don't have to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company to need to know about these things, right? We work
Right.
with clients every day who receive salary plus bonus, plus in some cases, some equity compensation. And a lot of times we'll work with, especially women who recently were promoted into a role and now they have equity compensation and they're like, ISOs and non-qualified stock options and ESPP, like what the heck does it all mean? How is my money taxed? What should I do, etc. So today we're going to keep it super high level, right? Just
Hmm.
like 101. But let's talk for starters. We broke the equity compensation piece down into different kinds and we'll just talk high level about how they work and importantly how the money is taxed because that's really the one of the big differences between the different programs that exist. So Teresa, why don't you kick us off with restricted stock units, which I would say are probably one of the more common equity compensation forms that we
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, we see it a lot more often. And especially now that companies like Google have become or now have a larger presence, especially in our area specific in the DMV. I'm starting to see a lot more clients who work for companies, especially tech or growth companies, who are being granted RSUs as a part of their so
Yeah.
an RSU is a restricted stock unit. and you receive them as a grant, but you don't have full ownership of the actual shares of stock that that grant represents or that that unit represents until certain conditions are met. Typically, it's a vesting schedule. And you may be familiar with the idea of vesting, even when it comes to things like your 401k plan, where after a certain number of years, certain percentages of the money that your employer matches for you, you now receive full ownership of. So it's a similar idea with vesting with RSUs. Many of them have that sort of a time schedule. So you may get a grant of 40 restricted stock units and they
Mhm.
vest over, let's say, a 4-year period. So that means 10 of those 40, actually, you take full ownership of every year for the next 4 years. With an RSU, those are taxed as ordinary income when the shares vest. So you're typically not taxed at the grant of it, which many people receive as a part of their compensation, right? They may get their salary plus a bonus plus a grant of a restricted stock unit, but you are not taxed on restricted stock units until those shares are actually vested and you take ownership of them. Another one that is also pretty popular that we see is a non qualified stock option. So the difference with those is that these are essentially rights, right? It gives you the right or the option to buy company stock at a set price or what the plan calls a strike price after a certain, again, vesting period. And these are taxed as ordinary income when they're exercised, when you actually use your right or your option to buy these stocks. And the exercise is typically the difference, or sorry, that you usually get taxed on the difference between the exercise price and the current price. So that's where the tax implication is. And then after that point, most of your tax implication is taxed as long-term capital gains, which has more tax advantages or tax, let's say, limitations, which is an advantage over your ordinary income. But there is a term or a length of time before those options expire. So it's a little bit of a different, probably less straightforward plan than a restricted stock unit, but also has its benefits in that you get some advantage of having a portion of that option being taxed as long-term gains.
Yeah, it requires too more action on your part, right? So
Yes.
you have to decide when you want to exercise those options, right? Versus the RSUs typically vest based on some sort of set date, as you mentioned, over that vesting schedule. So this is where, especially if you do have any of your compensation come in the form of equity compensation, working really closely with someone like us, financial planners, and your CPA is key. So many clients have come to us that do have RSUs and perhaps didn't have a lot of experience with RSUs before, get hit with a massive tax bill that they really
Hmm.
had no idea was coming, didn't really even understand why it happened because they're like, well, I
Right.
didn't execute anything, right? Like they just vested on their own automatically. And all of a sudden I have this big tax bill. So there's definitely some planning you want to do, some strategizing, especially if you have options around when is the best time to exercise? Do you hold? Do you sell immediately, et cetera?
Right. Yeah. And I think strategy is the key word, and that's where the planning comes in. For example, the idea with the NQSO or non qualified stock option is that you get to exercise at a price that's lower than what the stock is actually trading for. There's some advantage, but again, there's also some tax implications around that. And to your point, do I then exercise and then sell immediately, right? And take advantage of that very quick gain? Do I hold? So I think around all of these different options, planning is going to be essential. Working with an advisor or financial planner in conjunction with a tax person, CPA, accountant, tax preparer, to make sure that you're making the best use of these options.
Right. Exactly. For sure. All right. So next on the docket, we have what are called incentive stock options or ISOs. These work very similarly to the non qualified stock options that Atrisa was just going over, with one distinct feature, which is they can potentially be more tax beneficial if certain rules are met. So on the ISO, when you exercise that option, you do not have to pay taxes on the difference. So remember, Atrisa was talking about the difference between the strike price and the actual current price of the stock. In ISO, no taxes are due at the exercise. However, you have to hold the position at least 1 year after you exercise and for 2 years after the grant. So I'm just going to repeat that. So you have to hold the option for 2 years after you receive the grant, and then for 1 year after you exercise. And if those qualifications are met, then there is no tax when you exercise the ISO. And any gains that you do have once you sell the actual stock that you own, which is what you do when you exercise an option, by the way, you turn
Mhm,
it from a right to buy a
mhm.
stock to now you own that stock. So as long as you hold it for more than 1 year after you exercise, then it is taxed at that more beneficial long-term capital gains rate, which depending on your tax bracket can be somewhere between 15 up to 23.8, depending on where you fall from a tax standpoint. So those are pretty cool because they do
Yeah.
have a little bit more tax advantages than the non-qualified. Then you have something called a SAR, a stock appreciation right. And with the stock appreciation right, this is not actually owning the stock. It's not actually an option. Basically, it allows employees to benefit from the increase in the stock value over a period of time. Now, this is taxed as ordinary income, as if you earned the benefit and income. And there's no real capital gains to speak of because you don't actually own the stock. So it's kind of like a phantom sort of stock situation where you're able to participate in the upside of the company and of the stock without actually owning the stock. I don't see those all that often. How about you?
No, I actually have never seen it in a real life
In a
example
real
of a
life?
client.
Yeah.
One of those things you learn theoretically, right? But I've never actually worked with a client who's had a stock appreciation right.
Yeah. Yeah. We saw those on the CFP test,
Right.
but
On the CFP
not
exam,
sure
right.
exactly how common they are. But one very common plan that we
Mhm,
see is called an employee stock purchase plan or an ESPP. And this plan allows employees to purchase stock in the company for a discount. So, for example, it could be a 5% discount, 10% discount, 15% discount. So that's pretty nice because you're being able
mhm,
to buy the stock immediately for a gain, right? Because you're getting that discount. And you can do this through payroll deduction. So it makes it
mhm.
actually very convenient. So just like your 401k contributions or your TSP contributions are coming directly out of your paycheck, this allows you to automatically purchase stock in your company at that discount with payroll deductions. So super easy. And then as long as you hold those shares for greater than 1 year, that's the key number to get the more beneficial long term capital gains rate. If you buy the stock today and you sell it next month, it's going to be taxed as ordinary income because that's a short term capital gain, which is always taxed as ordinary income. But assuming you hold the stock for a minimum of a year, that gain will be taxed at long term capital gains.
Right.
Now, this also requires some planning, right? Because
Mhm,
we see frequently where clients will have some of their compensation be in equity and then they'll do the ESPP. And so if you're not careful and you don't pay close attention, all of a sudden a lot of your personal net worth and investable assets are all of a sudden concentrated in your company where you're working, plus you work there. So God forbid something happens with the company, there goes your job and there goes a nice chunk of your investable assets and your net worth. So we really want to make sure we're mindful, we're planning as you're accumulating more stock every year. We want to have a selling and distribution and diversification plan on the back end as well.
right. And for many employees who own company stock, they are considered insiders. So there is certain windows around when you can actually trade these stock for a lot of people who have equity compensation in their companies. So you want to be mindful of that as well when you're working with a planner and we talk about, okay, well, when is a good time to sell? In many cases, there are certain windows throughout the year when you're allowed to sell your share. So you want to be mindful of those restrictions as well, because it's not like you can just freely sell anytime you feel like it, because they don't ever want their employees to feel like they're chasing the quarterly report, right? Or trying to get ahead of some bad news with the company. So just keep those things in mind too.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody wants to be accused of insider
Right.
trading. It's not a good thing. So, yeah, and oftentimes you can predetermine like price points and
Hmm.
numbers of shares that you want to sell. So, that's another thing that we help clients with is to determine if you are considered an insider and you can't just freely sell any day you want, what price points would have to be hit that makes sense for you to execute some of those sales. So, very good
Yeah.
point. All right. Anything else to mention on the executive compensation
Mm,
subject?
yeah, no, I'm just going to double click on the idea to borrow your phrasing is that it's very important, especially if, like Ann mentioned at the top of the episode, where you've just been promoted and now equity comp is a part of your compensation package and you don't have experience with it. I think the sooner you start working with professionals about planning for that and the impact to you, the better you are over the long term. So even if you've never felt like you needed to work with an advisor or you manage your own tax returns through TurboTax or TurboHop yourself, now might be a good time to start consulting with a professional because there are planning strategies, tax strategies that you can take advantage of to really make this new comp structure work to your benefit. So just want to double click on that. Planning and strategizing is key with a lot of these plans.
Absolutely. Yes. Agree 100%, obviously.
Yeah.
All right. So, as always, we're happy to answer
Mhm.
questions if you have any. So, feel free to reach out. Our website is curoprivatewealth.com. And we actually want your questions for future podcast episodes. So, you can send those in to podcast at Curo Private Wealth. Curo is Curo. And send in your questions. If we answer one of your questions on our podcast, we will send you a $10 Amazon gift card as a thank you for taking the time to send in your questions. So we definitely want to hear from you, whether it's about executive compensation, equity compensation, or anything else on your mind. So with that, let's go into our closing thought for the day. So what do you
Yeah.
have for us for a closing thought?
So as we're going into the fall season, I am concerned, and I hate to call her out because but my sister, I know in year
Shout out to your amazing sister.
to my sister. But I know one thing that gets hard for her as the season changes is even just an effect on mood, right?
Mm.
As the days get shorter, you get less sunshine and the weather gets cooler, especially depending on where you live. Like, for example, even though I was at the Bahamas in sunshine, it's been gloomy and
Oh
rainy
my
here.
gosh. I'm over it. I am over the weather. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that we sometimes underestimate the impact of that just on our mood in general and how we relate in the world. So I just want to my closing thought is to be very mindful of your mental health as we start to go into the winter months. Pay close attention to how you're feeling. If you feel more, tired, more sluggish than normal, it may not actually even just be a physical symptom of being tired. There may be some mental things going on. And I think it's important that as you're dealing with rain and getting colder and you're not outside on the patio or by the pool as much anymore, that you keep an eye on that and just check in with yourself. Check in with your mental health, make sure that you're doing those things that keep you invigorated, even, when the sun, doesn't, starts going down at 5:30, right? You leave your office and it's already dark. So just be mindful of those things and making sure you're checking in with yourself to be sure that you're being kind to yourself and giving yourself the things that you need to keep you mentally healthy as we go into the fall and the winter months.
I love that. Yeah. And I think also like having a toolbox at the ready for things that you know can help make your mood feel better. Like what works for you? Is it obviously if it's dark outside, you can't go outside for a walk, but maybe it's a meditation or maybe it's, if it's a weekend going to get a massage or going to do a workout or like having, here are 5 things that I can pick from if I know I'm not feeling my best that will help my mood feel better. Or it's one of those lights. I mean, I know people who suffer from pretty
Hmm.
bad seasonal depression and they've got those lights that they put in their office or in their house. So whatever that is for you. But I think that's a great reminder and it's coming fast.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially with because I talked to my sister last night, and she was like, "Oh, it's been so rainy, like, I feel like I don't wanna do anything. I'm struggling to get out of bed a little bit more now because you wake up and it's overcast and rainy, you're not getting the sunshine." So, it just made me think about it, and, of course, we're not doctors and we don't give medical advice, but there are also supplements. Some people suffer with certain deficiencies, and I'll use myself personally, I have a vitamin D deficiency, and that also has a real impact on mood. So you want to also just check in with your doctor and
Yeah.
see if there may be any sort of supplements you can take as well to help boost mood as we go through a phase of the year where it's harder to get it from outside activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, this weather, we were talking about it this morning and the hurricane that hit down in Florida
Hmm.
and then, Georgia and North Carolina, we were putting things into perspective this morning and just remembering how much devastation happened. I've seen, some of the pictures like down in Asheville, North Carolina, and just how terrible that is. So, we're up here complaining about the overcast and the rain and people down in North Carolina are dealing with a lot of devastation. So,
Yeah,
just want to send our thoughts and prayers to everybody who is impacted there, and we hope that everyone is safe and that the rebuilding activity starts quickly and can happen in a relatively short amount of time. So,
yeah.
just wanted to mention that. So my closing thought is it is the beginning of the fourth quarter. Can't believe it. So
Gee,
you and I are already starting to do business planning and budget planning for 2025, which again is unreal. So my reminder today is it is a fantastic time for us all to look over our yearly goals. What did we set out in the beginning of the year to accomplish this year? What was our theme for the year? And just a nice check in to see how we're doing. And because we still have enough time between now and the end of the year that if we need to course correct anything or we need to kind of like work on, ooh, I forgot that I set that as a goal or whatever the case may be, we still have enough time to do that. So I think it's a great idea at this point in the year to check in, see how we're doing. I also think it's super important to take a moment to give appreciation to yourself for how much you have gotten done this year. I know we all have gotten a lot done, and it may always feel like we've got more to do. And, human nature is to focus on what we haven't accomplished, but we have all accomplished so much this year. So, in addition to figuring out what you want to do for the rest of this year, please take a moment to give yourself grace and gratitude and, give yourself a nice shout out for the things that you have done because we have all done quite a lot this year. And we need to acknowledge that in addition to focusing on what we still need to do.
absolutely. That's a great reminder to just give yourself some grace. It's always a great theme. I feel like we should put that on a Living Richly t-shirt.
I
Give
know.
gi give yourself grace. I feel like we say that a lot on this
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Give yourself grace. It should be like one side, give yourself grace, and the back, live
Live
richly.
richly, yeah, love that. Don't
Yeah.
steal our ideas, we're copywriting.
No. Please don't. All right. Well, thank you as always for joining us. We have a great time recording this for you all. Please, if you have a friend who is recently promoted, even if you don't know if they get equity compensation as part of their comp package, don't worry. Don't make it awkward. Don't ask them.
Right.
Just send them the episode. Just send them the episode like, hey, congratulations on your promotion. Here is some information that may be helpful for you. So that's our ask is that you share this episode with someone you know who has recently gotten promoted. Please give us a review. Let us know what you are enjoying about the podcast. And please make sure to give us 5 stars and send in your questions because we want to hear from you. We record this every week for you all. So we want to
Yes.
hear from you and what's on your mind, what you want us to talk about. So thanks again for tuning in. We will see you again next week. And until then.
Until then, live richly.